Adam Durrant joins us now from the Niagara Workforce Planning Board. He's their resident statistics nerd. And Adam, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the latest job stats that the Planning Board has put out. What does Niagara look like when we look at us in relation to the country as a whole, to the province?
Well, we're trending in the right direction. We're facing the same challenges that Ontario and Canada are really facing. If we look at the summer, we had about 15,000 people in Niagara gain employment, which is absolutely great. But when we dig into that a little bit more, we see some of the challenges. So about 60% of those gains were gained by men, 40% were gained by women. And this has been an economic disruption that has predominantly affected more women than it has men. So women have lost employment, men have gained employment. So there's a real imbalance to how those gains are happening. So again, broad strokes, it's great. But when we get into the details, that's where we start to see some of the challenges of this pandemic and how it's impacted employment.
That is a huge factor during this pandemic with a lot of the precarious work that came to an end during COVID-19. Women were the ones left out in the woods.
It's requiring an understanding that goes beyond just looking at the unemployment rate. If we look at that, we still see a large number of people who are actively looking for work, about 50% more than what we would normally see this time last year. We also have to understand that with entire sectors shut down, some people just left the workforce altogether. So we're going to have older workers who may have been on the verge of retirement having to reassess those plans. And we're now seeing some of those broader demographic shifts that were slow moving over time. Now we're having to see, right, is this something that instead of we measure in a scope of years, we now start looking at in the scope of months? And what sort of challenges is that going to provide for us?
Speaking of sectors that are entirely shut down, tourism here in Niagara, a big driver of our economy, probably the biggest driver of our economy.
We cannot underscore enough the importance of tourism to our local economy. We've got about 35,000 jobs in Niagara that directly serve tourism. And when we start breaking that down a little bit, it's about 18,000 or so in food and beverage service, and about another 8 or 9,000 or so in accommodations. These were sectors that were completely shuttered during the first wave of lockdowns. Arguably, accommodations still very much a shuttered operation compared to where it would be operating this time last year. So the good news is that we have seen recovery in these sectors. The bad news is that they were the hardest hit during the course and have been very gradual in their recovery. So again, it's a case of we're trending in the right direction, but now we're looking at forces that are completely beyond our control as to how well that recovery is going to continue and for how long it continues. We have weather as the predominant factor there, and spread of the virus, which even over the last 2 weeks, we've seen what's been going on outside of Niagara on that front. So these are the challenges now.
When you look at accommodations as well, and places like the Meridian Centre in St. Catharines, the Scotiabank Convention Centre in Niagara Falls, these are buildings that take a lot of money to keep running. And if there's no income coming in, how long can they continue to be viable operations?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the work that we're doing right now at the planning board, why we're looking into accommodations and food service, why we're looking into retail trade, why we're trying to take a broader 12 to 24 month approach to understanding what the employment impacts of this are going to be, and taking a little bit more of a flexible approach to understanding how those scenarios might play out. So that's we just don't have the data right now, and the systems that we use to get that data, they didn't get a pandemic in mind when they were built. 99% of the time, that's okay. Now we're living in that exceptional phase where the data can't update us fast enough to try and get a sense for what the virus is doing to the workforce.
If you look at Niagara 12 months from now, where do you see the need in employment?
That's a great question. So if we look at what the current trends are for job demand, we see a lot of need for people who are going to be working in that frontline capacity. And that was consistent during the lockdowns, and it stayed consistent afterwards. So people working in customer facing positions, people working in logistics and shipping positions, people working in the material handler positions, that demand has been staying consistent. We've seen our manufacturing base stay relatively stable and relatively strong, which means that skilled trades background and that sort of work where you have a specific trade that you went to school for likely are still going to be staying in demand. Where we're going to see challenges likely is on some of the more advanced post-secondary training, because that was always not in short demand within the region, but it was definitely an area where there was less demand in Niagara than we saw in other sectors.